Hoki mai anō, welcome back. I'm joined now by our panel, former National List MP Agnes Loheni and President of the Islamic Women's Council, Alia Den-Zayzan. Thank you so much for your time this morning, for joining us on the panel. Agnes, to you first. Chris Farfoy is likely to announce a sort of a special visa for Ukrainians' wider families to come here because nothing currently exists. I found that surprising. Do you?
Yes, that was very surprising, but it's fair to say that what's happened over in the Ukraine has been the topic that's probably taken our minds off what we're going through here. New Zealanders have a lot of heart for refugees who have found themselves in this situation. And we'd rightly want to have some information about our capacity and the ability and what we can do for these refugees.
Yeah, Alia, what can we do? Should we, I mean, the government's saying, yeah, we're reaching out to the UNHCR saying, if we can help with refugees, we will. But we have an annual quota of about 1,500. I mean, do you feel like that's enough?
Well, with New Zealand, we have a lot of resources that we can actually support more people than have been. For example, we produce food for 11 million people and we only have 5 million people in the country. So we obviously have some capacity to bring in more people. And families, obviously, that connection is extremely important to New Zealanders who are already here. So that would actually be avoiding some trauma while providing support to people who really need it. So I believe it needs to happen, not just in this case, it's happened in previous cases, and we've got to make sure that we're supporting our whānau wherever they are.
Yeah, just finally on that point, it seems to me slightly odd that we have had this in previous cases like Bosnia and Kosovo and other war-torn areas, and yet we have to reinvent the wheel again when another war breaks out around the world.
Well, that's where the proactive efforts by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, immigration, and governments generally need to get things in place and those rules so things can be launched quickly in such rising cases, but also just generally being more diplomatic and being involved internationally to know what we need before it happens, actually.
Okay. Let's move on to our next topic, which is the merger of the new public media entity that Chris Farfoy has announced. Agnes, does this kind of reshaping of public media seem logical to you?
No, not really. And I think it's interesting when he commented saying that this was about future-proofing. Innovation doesn't come by the government. It isn't driven by the government, and definitely not by anything that's publicly funded. So in terms of the minister saying that we want to tell our own stories, well, that's already happening. People are picking up their phone and they are telling their stories without any government funding. So I'm still not sure what the problem is that is being fixed here.
Right, although he is saying that the public media needs to be part of that space to reach those audiences. Alia, I mean, Agnes is saying it's already happening, and we also have New Zealand on Air here as a funder of those kinds of programs. Do you think there does need to be public media that's more reflective of different cultures and younger audiences?
Yes, public media at times has been more progressive in areas in the past, and it allows for support of communities and authentic voice. At times we know, while everybody has a phone, we know not everybody's accurate on their phone, and we need some media that are providing really good, authentic, and trustworthy advice. So it can work. My concern more is that the government having influence on that voice once it becomes so large and in there, and actually directing what the voice is. And that's a concern. And given that the establishment board hasn't been given those details yet, we don't know if it will work.
Yeah, Agnes, that's just one last point on that. I mean, there is sort of, some mistrust of media. There's been quite a bit of that in terms of it's been government funded. Is this plan going to sort of, reassure people, or is it going to exacerbate that?
I don't think there's any reassurance that's going to come from this. And just back to the point where the minister was talking about, where you asked him about overseas modelling, he was very evasive on that and suggests that it perhaps hasn't been done. So again, when we talk about the government was talking about the podium of truth, and so that's sort of been a lot of their undoing in this last period, where they've decided that the truth can only come from their podium, and so there does have to be trust built back in. I'm not sure it's going to happen with this merger.
Well, let's move on to another of the big portfolios for Chris Farfoy. Now, he's responsible for hate speech. Brought out the discussion paper last year and got a lot of kickback. So we've just heard earlier that these laws are still not ready. Is that good enough?
That just hits and hits hard. That's not correct. He has commissioners, the government themselves put into the Royal Commission, and they said it was needed. And the hate speech proposal, it's not even legislation, did not inflame what was happening before Parliament. And it was offensive for him to say that, actually. What is needed, and it should have happened right away, was addressing the at-risk communities that the Royal Commission found. Why the current government isn't willing to step into that space when their own prime minister said the week after the attacks that hate is a virus that's left unattended will spread, which is what exactly happened. It was left unattended for 3 years here, and we're continuing forward. It's going to get larger unless they actually act.
So, Agnes, would you agree that, with Alia's point there, that maybe if they had acted earlier, brought it in, that we may not have had the hate virus, as Alia puts it, spread to in front of Parliament?
No, actually I don't. Actually, I thought the Minister's response was a very good, honest, reflective one. I think after the train wreck interviews, when they brought out the discussion document last year, gave good case for pausing this and giving it very good, careful consideration. And so this is definitely a policy area that I think should not be rushed.
I'm wondering why religion shouldn't be protected under the hate speech legislation. I wonder why LGBTQ communities as well who are in there. And it would be nice to know why the government and why other parties then don't think that it's a reason to be supported when we have respected commissioners, judge of this nation, and somebody from government themselves saying it was needed after they've looked into all of this.
So, Ali, I mean, you're disappointed with the time frame, but Agnes, you say that, Chris Farfoy was saying that he didn't want to inflame the situation. The situation was inflamed, though. We already had that in front of Parliament. I didn't really quite understand what he meant by that.
No, and the thing is, we actually do have laws to cover when you incite violence through speech. But again, when they came out last year with that discussion document, and the threshold appeared much lower in terms of around things that were insulting. And so this does need to take time, and it's not a difficult one, I think, for the Minister. And so I did actually like his response this morning.
Alia, I mean, what would you say to the Minister about the time frame?
Well, I think, okay, regarding inflamed, we have attacks en masse because of religion. And that was clearly violent. People died. And are we going to let it happen again? And the aspect also regarding hate speech is it might start out for one person to feel like it's only a word or two, but when it's actually ongoing and reaching the levels that it has, then it is harmful and it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so the Minister specifically said, he didn't say that hate speech inflamed things outside Parliament. He said he didn't want to inflame the issues by talking about it.
It's already inflamed. The hate is there. It's been allowed to grow and it hasn't been addressed. And the actual fact is there are some groups in this community in New Zealand that are not protected under the legislation. It's not just changing language. There are unprotected groups. And that's what the concern is.
Agnes, do you believe that the current proposal, I mean, that they had words like insulting in the actual definition of hate speech that you were talking about from a year ago, should that be removed? Are you saying that those things should be removed to guarantee freedom of expression?
Definitely, I think that threshold was far too low for someone to say something to you that's insulting. If you look across the various examples that would cover, that would be hugely problematic, hugely problematic.
OK. All right, we're going to leave that debate there for the moment. I'm sure we're going to see more detail soon. Thank you so much to our panel, Alia Dan Zysen and Agnes Loheni. by Iwhai Akane. Insights from the World Health Organization epidemiologist Dr. Margaret Harris on life after Omicron has peaked.